The bullet grazed Jacob Young's shoulder as he threw himself behind the water trough, his heart hammering against his ribs while chaos erupted in the dusty streets of Abiquiu, New Mexico. It was the summer of 1883, and the bank robbery he had stumbled upon was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The robbers burst through the bank doors, guns blazing, and Jacob watched from his precarious position as townspeople scattered like tumbleweeds in a windstorm. His horse, Thunder, a paint gelding with more spirit than sense, whinnied nervously where he was tied to the hitching post nearby. Jacob had exactly $3.17 to his name, a worn saddle, and that horse. Nothing else in this world belonged to him except the clothes on his back and the beat-up hat that had just flown off his head from the force of diving for cover. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it started. The robbers thundered past on their horses, kicking up clouds of red dust that coated everything and everyone. Jacob rose slowly, checking the graze on his shoulder. It stung like hellfire but was not deep. He retrieved his hat and moved toward Thunder, who stomped and rolled his eyes with anxiety. That was when he saw her. A young woman stood frozen in the middle of the street, her dark hair coming loose from its pins, her blue cotton dress covered in dust. She stared after the departing robbers with wide eyes, not from fear exactly, but from shock. In her trembling hands, she clutched a leather satchel to her chest. Jacob noticed immediately that one of the robbers had dropped something near her feet during their frantic escape. A small cloth bag, the kind banks used for coin. "Miss, you should get out of the street," Jacob called, approaching her cautiously while keeping one hand on Thunder's neck to steady both the horse and himself. His shoulder throbbed, but he ignored it. She turned those eyes on him, and Jacob felt something shift in his chest. They were green, he realized, the color of spring grass after rain. She could not have been much older than 22 or 23, and despite the dust and dishevelment, there was a dignity about her that made him stand a little straighter. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice stronger than he expected. She was looking at his shoulder where blood seeped through his shirt. "Just a scratch," he said, though it burned something fierce. "You should not be standing out here. They might come back." "They will not come back," she said with certainty, finally stepping toward the wooden sidewalk. "They got what they wanted, or most of it." She glanced down at the cloth bag near her feet. Jacob bent to pick it up, hefting its weight. Definitely coins inside, probably a fair amount. "This should go back to the bank. The bank manager is dead," she said quietly, and Jacob saw the tremor run through her. "They shot him when he tried to stop them. Mr. Patterson. He was a good man." Jacob felt a weight settle on his shoulders that had nothing to do with his injury. Another senseless death in a territory that had seen too many. He looked at the young woman more carefully. "Did you know him well?" "He gave me work when I needed it most," she said, and there was a catch in her voice. "I kept the books for him, did his correspondence. I am Natalie Sullivan, and now I suppose I am unemployed again." The way she said it, with a mix of grief and pragmatism, told Jacob that this woman had known hardship before. He held out his free hand. "Jacob Young. Most folks just call me Jake. I am sorry for your loss, Miss Sullivan." She shook his hand, her grip firm despite everything. "Thank you, Mr. Young, and thank you for thinking of returning the money. Not everyone would." "Well, it is not mine to keep," he said simply. He looked around at the gathering crowd. The sheriff was nowhere to be seen, probably out of town as usual when something important happened. "We should secure this somewhere safe until the authorities can sort out what happens with the bank." Natalie nodded slowly. "Mr. Patterson had a deputy manager, but he left for Santa Fe 3 days ago to visit his sick mother. I suppose I am the only one left who knows the bank's affairs." She straightened her shoulders. The money should go in the safe. I have the combination. Jacob followed her into the bank, Thunder's reins in one hand and the recovered money in the other. The interior was in shambles, papers scattered everywhere, a chair overturned. And there, behind the counter, lay Mr. Patterson, a kindly-looking man in his 50s with graying hair, now still and silent. Natalie made a small sound of distress but moved forward with purpose. "We should get the undertaker," Jacob said gently. "I know, but first the money." Mr. Patterson would have wanted the money secured. He was devoted to his duty. Her voice was tight with controlled emotion. She moved behind the counter, carefully stepping around her former employer, and opened the safe with practiced turns of the dial. Jacob deposited the recovered bag inside, noting that the safe was nearly empty. The robbers had clearly gotten most of it. Once the safe was locked again, Natalie seemed to deflate slightly. The shock was wearing off, and reality was settling in. Jacob found himself wanting to do something, anything, to ease the lost look in her eyes. "Miss Sullivan, let me walk you home," he offered. "And maybe you should have the doctor look you over, make sure you are all right." "I am fine," she said automatically, then seemed to reconsider. "But yes, I should go home, and you should have that shoulder tended to." They walked together through Abiquiu's dusty streets, Thunder following along like an oversized dog. The town was not large, perhaps 500 souls, nestled in the high desert of New Mexico territory with the red rocks and mesas rising in the distance. The Rio Chama ran nearby, giving life to the cottonwoods and providing water for the farms and ranches scattered around the area. It was beautiful country, harsh and unforgiving but beautiful nonetheless. Natalie lived in a small adobe house on the edge of town, painted white with blue shutters. It was modest but well kept. She paused at the gate to her tiny yard. "Thank you for your kindness today, Mr. Young," she said formally. "I hope your shoulder heals quickly." Jacob found himself reluctant to leave. "Will you be all right? Is there family who can sit with you?" Something flickered across her face. "No family, not anymore, but I will manage." "I always do." The words were brave, but Jacob heard the loneliness beneath them. He understood that feeling all too well. "Well, if you need anything, I will be around town for a few days at least, probably camping by the river since I cannot afford the hotel." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his worn clothes, his beat-up saddle, the horse that was clearly his most valuable possession. "You are passing through?" "Looking for work, actually. Ranch hand breaking horses, whatever I can find." "I heard there might be opportunities in this area." He did not mention that he had heard wrong, that most of the ranches were already staffed up for the season, that he was running out of options and territory. Natalie studied him for a moment longer, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing right through his careful pride to the desperation underneath. But she did not call him on it. The Rodriguez Ranch, about 10 miles north. They were looking for someone to help with their horses, last I heard. Miguel Rodriguez breeds some of the finest horses in the territory. If you are good with horses, he might have work. Hope flared in Jacob's chest. "Thank you, Miss Sullivan. That is the best news I have had in weeks." She almost smiled, just a slight curve of her lips, but it transformed her face. "You are welcome. And please, if you are going to be around Abiquiu, call me Natalie. Formality seems excessive after the day we have had." "Then you should call me Jake," he said, returning her almost smile with a real one. He tipped his hat to her and turned away, but her voice stopped him. "Jake, you should have the doctor look at that shoulder before you do anything else. Doctor Chen's office is 2 streets over, above the general store. He is good and does not charge much if you are honest about your circumstances." Jacob felt heat creep up his neck. His poverty was that obvious then, but there was no judgment in her tone, only practical concern. I will do that. Thank you, Natalie. He walked Thunder to the doctor's office, and Dr. Chen, a middle-aged Chinese man who had come west with the railroad workers and stayed, cleaned and bandaged his shoulder with efficient kindness. Jacob paid him 50 cents, which the doctor accepted without comment, though they both knew the service was worth more. By the time Jacob made camp by the Rio Chama, the sun was setting, painting the mesas in shades of orange and red that took his breath away. He unsaddled Thunder, rubbed the horse down, and let him drink from the clear running water. His provisions were meager: some cornmeal, a bit of salt pork, coffee. He would need to find work soon, or he would be in serious trouble. As he lay in his bedroll that night, staring up at stars so bright and numerous they seemed unreal, Jacob's thoughts kept returning to Natalie Sullivan, to her green eyes and her brave voice, and the way she had kept going even when her world had just been shaken. He had known her for only a few hours, but something about her had gotten under his skin. Maybe it was the loneliness he recognized in her, a mirror of his own. Maybe it was something else, something he was not ready to name. The next morning, Jacob rose with the sun and rode north toward the Rodriguez ranch. The land was beautiful in the early light, all red earth and green scrub and the distant blue mountains. Thunder was in good spirits, prancing occasionally, and Jacob let himself hope that this might be the break he needed. Miguel Rodriguez was a man in his 60s with weathered brown skin and eyes that missed nothing. He looked over Thunder with an appreciative eye, then looked over Jacob with the same attention. "You know horses?" Rodriguez asked without preamble. "Been working with them my whole life, sir. Breaking, training, breeding, whatever needs doing." "Can you handle a horse that thinks he is too smart for his own good?" "Those are my favorite kind," Jacob said honestly. Rodriguez's mustache twitched, which might have been a smile. "Come with me." He led Jacob to a corral where a beautiful bay stallion paced and snorted, tossing his head. The horse was magnificent, all muscle and fire, but Jacob could see the meanness in his eyes. "Name is Diablo," Rodriguez said, "and he has earned it. Through my best trainer last week broke the man's arm. I have a buyer coming in 3 weeks who wants a trained riding horse. If you can make Diablo rideable by then, I will pay you $50 and provide your meals and a place to sleep. If you cannot, you get nothing but the meals and the bruises. $50. It was a fortune to Jacob right now. It was also a dangerous proposition. That horse could kill him if he was not careful. But he had been working with difficult horses since he was 14 years old, and he trusted his instincts. "I will do it," he said. "But I need to do it my way. Patience and consistency, not force." Rodriguez nodded. "I do not care how you do it as long as it gets done and the horse is not ruined. You can start tomorrow. Come early." Jacob rode back to Abiquiu feeling lighter than he had in months. Steady work, even if just for 3 weeks, was a blessing. He stopped at the general store to buy a few provisions with his dwindling funds and nearly ran into Natalie on the sidewalk. "Oh," she said, steadying herself. "Jake, how is your shoulder?" "Much better, thank you. And thank you for the tip about the Rodriguez ranch. I start tomorrow." Her face brightened. "That is wonderful news. Miguel is a good man to work for, demanding but fair." They stood there for a moment, and Jacob found himself searching for a reason to prolong the conversation. "How are you managing?" After yesterday, the light dimmed from her eyes. "As well as can be expected. The funeral is tomorrow afternoon. The bank will remain closed until the ownership situation is sorted out. Mr. Patterson's nephew in Albuquerque is his heir, apparently. I suppose he will decide what to do with the business." "And your job?" Jake asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "I have no idea if there will still be a position for me when the new owner takes over. If there is a new owner. The nephew might just sell the building and liquidate everything. She said it matter-of-factly, but he could hear the worry underneath. "You will find something," Jake said with more confidence than he felt. "You are clearly good at what you do." "Thank you for the vote of confidence," she said, and this time her smile was more genuine. "Where are you staying?" "Still camping by the river?" "Yes, but Rodriguez is providing a bunk once I start tomorrow. It will be good to sleep under a roof again." Natalie hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Would you like to come to dinner tonight?" "I am not much of a cook, but I can manage a decent stew, and it seems the least I can do since my information led to your employment." Jacob's first instinct was to refuse, not wanting to impose or use up her resources when she was facing an uncertain future herself. But the hope in her eyes stopped him. She was lonely, he realized, as lonely as he was, and maybe they could ease that for each other at least for one evening. "I would like that very much," he said. "Thank you." 6 o'clock, she asked. "I will be there." Jacob spent the rest of the day washing his spare shirt in the river and trying to make himself presentable. He brushed Thunder until the horse shone, more out of nervous energy than necessity. When 6 o'clock approached, he walked to Natalie's small house with his heart beating faster than it should. She answered the door in a simple green dress that matched her eyes, her dark hair pulled back neatly. The house smelled wonderful, like meat and vegetables and fresh bread. "Come in," she said warmly. "I hope you are hungry." The interior of her home was small but cozy. A main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space with a fireplace against one wall and a small table set for two. Through an open doorway, he could see a tiny bedroom. Everything was neat and clean, with small touches that spoke of a person who cared about her surroundings despite having little money. Wildflowers in a jar on the table. A colorful woven blanket draped over the single chair. Books on a shelf, well worn and clearly rayed. "Your home is lovely," Jake said honestly. "It is small, but it is mine," Natalie replied, ladling stew into bowls. "My mother left it to me when she passed 2 years ago. It is the only thing of value I own." They sat at the small table, and Jake was suddenly aware of how intimate this was, how domestic. Just the two of them in the warm lamplight, sharing a meal. He could not remember the last time he had done something like this. "Tell me about yourself, Jake Young," Natalie said as they ate. "Where are you from? What brings a skilled horseman to Abiquiu with only his horse and a few dollars?" Jake considered deflecting but found he did not want to. There was something about Natalie that invited honesty. "I am from Texas originally. Grew up on a ranch outside of San Antonio. My parents both died when I was 16. Fever took them within days of each other. The ranch went to my uncle, who made it clear I was not welcome to stay. So I took Thunder, who was just a colt then, and I have been drifting ever since. Working ranches, breaking horses, doing whatever I could find. I am 25 now, and I have exactly $3.17 to my name. Or I did before I paid the doctor and bought some supplies. I am down to about $2 now." He expected pity or judgment, but Natalie just nodded. "I understand that kind of loss. My father died when I was 10. My mother did her best, taking in sewing and washing, but it was never quite enough. I learned young that life is not fair and you have to make your own way. I was fortunate that I liked books and numbers and Mrs. Henderson at the school let me study whenever I could get away from helping my mother. When Mama died, Mr. Patterson gave me a chance even though most men would not hire a woman to keep books. He said he did not care about convention, only competence." "He sounds like he was a good man," Jake said. "He was," Natalie agreed softly. "The town will be poorer without him." They talked as they ate, and the conversation flowed more easily than Jake would have thought possible. Natalie was intelligent and well-read despite her limited formal education. She had opinions about everything from territorial politics to the best way to train a dog, and she was not afraid to express them. Jake found himself laughing more than he had in months, and the weight he had been carrying seemed to lift. After dinner, Natalie made coffee, and they sat in the gathering dusk while she told him about Abiquiu. The town had been established long ago, first as a Spanish settlement, then Mexican, and now American after the territory changed hands. It was a mixing place of cultures, Hispanic and Anglo and native peoples trading and living in an uneasy but generally peaceful coexistence. "It is a good town," Natalie said. "Small enough that everyone knows everyone, which can be both comfort and curse. But people generally try to look after each other. Except when they are robbing banks," Jake said wryly. "Yes, well, those men were not from here, outsiders, which is why they thought they could get away with it." She paused. "The sheriff sent out a posse this morning. I heard they caught 2 of the 3 robbers before noon. The third got away with most of the money." "Will the bank survive?" Jake asked. Natalie shrugged. "I honestly do not know. That is up to Mr. Patterson's nephew. If he decides it is not worth the trouble, Abiquiu will be without a bank, and that will hurt everyone." She looked at Jake. "See how interconnected everything is. One act of violence ripples outward." Jake nodded slowly. "That is true everywhere, I suppose, but also true of acts of kindness. You giving me that information about Rodriguez, him giving me a chance, you inviting me to dinner, those ripple out too." Natalie smiled. "That is a nice way to think about it." As the evening drew to a close, Jake realized he did not want to leave. But he also did not want to overstay his welcome or give the wrong impression. "Thank you for dinner," he said, standing reluctantly. "And for the company. It has been a long time since I had either." "Thank you for accepting the invitation," Natalie replied, walking him to the door. "And good luck tomorrow with Diablo. From what I have heard, you will need it." "I will be fine," Jake said with more confidence than he felt. "I have a way with stubborn creatures." "I am sure you do," she said, and something in her tone made him look at her more closely. She was standing close, looking up at him, and in the lamplight she was beautiful, not in a showy way but in a real way that made his breath catch. "Natalie," he said quietly, not even sure what he wanted to say. "Yes," she whispered. "Would it be all right if I came by again?" "After work sometime. Just to talk." Her smile was slow and genuine. "I would like that very much." Jake walked back to his camp by the river feeling like his feet were not quite touching the ground. It was foolish, he told himself. He barely knew this woman. He had nothing to offer her. He was leaving in 3 weeks once the job was done. But none of that seemed to matter to his heart, which had clearly decided to have opinions of its own. The next morning, Jake reported to the Rodriguez ranch at dawn. Miguel showed him to a small bunk room in the barn, clean and sparse but more than adequate. Then they went to face Diablo. The horse was even more impressive in the morning light, his coat gleaming, his muscles rippling under his skin. He was also clearly not interested in cooperating with anything Jake had in mind. "Take your time," Miguel said. "I will check on you later." Jake spent the first hour just standing near the corral, letting Diablo get used to his presence. The horse snorted and paced, occasionally charging the fence as if trying to intimidate him. Jake just stood there, relaxed and calm, projecting an energy of patience and confidence. By midday, Diablo had stopped charging and was watching Jake with wary curiosity. Jake moved slowly into the corral, not approaching the horse directly but just occupying the same space. Diablo backed away but did not bolt. It was slow, delicate work. Over the next few days, Jake established a routine. He would arrive early, spend time just being near Diablo, letting the horse learn his scent, his voice, his movements. He brought apples and carrots, leaving them where Diablo could find them after he left. Gradually, the horse began to relax. Each evening, after cleaning up and eating dinner with Miguel and his wife Carmen, Jake would walk into town to see Natalie. They fell into an easy pattern. Sometimes she would cook dinner. Sometimes he would bring something from Carmen, who had decided she liked Jake and wanted to make sure he ate properly. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing. Jake learned that Natalie loved poetry but was terrible at singing. That she had always wanted to travel but had never been more than 50 miles from Abiquiu. That she was fiercely intelligent and often frustrated by the limitations placed on her because of her gender. That she had a wicked sense of humor that could make him laugh until his sides hurt. Natalie learned that Jake had a deep love for the land and the animals that lived on it. That he had been reading every book he could get his hands on since he was young, trying to educate himself beyond his limited schooling. That he was honest to a fault and loyal to the few people he let into his life. That beneath his quiet exterior was a passionate soul who felt things deeply. 2 weeks into his time in Abiquiu, Jake was making real progress with Diablo. The horse would now approach him willingly and accept a halter. Jake had started leading him around the corral, establishing trust and dominance in equal measure. Miguel watched these sessions with approval. "You have a gift," the older man said one afternoon. "That horse trusts you. I have not seen him trust anyone before." "He just needed patience," Jake replied. "Someone to see past the anger to the fear underneath." Miguel gave him a sharp look. "You are talking about more than horses, I think." Jake flushed. "Maybe." "The Sullivan girl," Miguel said. "It was not a question." "Natalie," Jake corrected gently. "Yes, Natalie. She is a good woman, had a hard time of things but has kept her dignity and her kindness. The town respects her." Jake heard the warning under the words, "Do not hurt her, do not toy with her." He met Miguel's eyes steadily. "I respect her too, more than I can say." Miguel nodded slowly. "Good, because if you did not, we would have a problem, you and I." That evening, Jake told Natalie about the conversation. They were sitting on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Miguel is protective of you," he said. Natalie smiled. "He and Carmen have been good to me since Mama died. They do not have children of their own, so they sort of adopted half the young people in town. You should be honored that he is warning you off. It means he thinks you might actually be a danger to my heart." "And am I?" Jake asked quietly. "A danger to your heart." Natalie turned to look at him, and the expression in her green eyes made his chest tight. "I think you might be. Are you willing to take responsibility for that?" "I have nothing to offer you, Natalie," Jake said, the words tearing out of him. "No home, no steady job, no prospects. Just thunder and whatever I can earn with my hands and my back." "You have yourself," Natalie said simply. "Your integrity, your kindness, your heart. Is that not something to offer?" "It does not pay bills or put food on the table," Jake argued, even though everything in him wanted to reach for what she was offering. "No, but neither does being alone," Natalie countered. "Jake, I am not asking you for promises you cannot keep. I am not asking you to be something you are not. I am just saying that what you have, what you are, that is enough for me, if you are willing to share your life too." The words hung between them, profound and terrifying. Jake felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters. Every logical part of his brain told him this was foolish, that he should finish the job with Diablo, take his $50 and move on before anyone got hurt. But his heart, that traitorous organ, had other ideas. "Natalie," he said slowly, "I am falling in love with you. I think I started falling that first day in the street when you stood there covered in dust, but still dignified. and every day since, I fall a little more. It scares me to death because I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be enough for someone like you." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she was smiling. "You do not have to know how. We will figure it out together. And for the record, I am falling in love with you too, with your gentleness and your strength and the way you see the world. With your honesty and your humor and your hands that are so patient with a frightened horse. With all of you, Jake Young. Thunder included." He kissed her then, unable to resist any longer. It was a gentle kiss, tender and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "What do we do now?" he whispered. "We keep going," she whispered back. "One day at a time, we figure out how to build a life together even if we have to start with almost nothing." "I have Thunder," Jake said, a smile tugging at his lips. "And I have this house," Natalie replied. "See, we are rich already." They laughed together, and the sound was joyous and free. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he had a future that was not just about survival but about actually living. The next week passed in a blur of hard work and growing hope. Jake continued his work with Diablo, and the horse was responding beautifully. He was now accepting a saddle and allowing Jake to mount. Though they had not yet attempted anything more complicated than walking around the corral, news came that Mr. Patterson's nephew had arrived in Abiquiu to assess the bank situation. His name was Richard Patterson, and he was a businessman from Albuquerque in his 40s. He spent several days going through the bank's records and meeting with town leaders. Natalie was called in to help him understand the books she had been keeping. She returned from that meeting looking cautiously optimistic. "He is going to keep the bank open," she told Jake. "He says Abiquiu needs it, and he thinks it can be profitable with proper management. And he offered me my old job back with a raise even, because he said my records were the most meticulous he had ever seen." Jake spun her around in celebration, both of them laughing. "That is wonderful news. I am so proud of you." "It means I will have steady income," Natalie said, her eyes bright. "Enough to live on comfortably, enough to save a little." Jake understood what she was not saying, that she would have stability even if he did not, that she would be all right even if he had to leave to find more work. The knowledge was both comforting and sobering. "I am happy for you," he said sincerely. "You deserve good things, Natalie." "We deserve good things," she corrected. "Both of us." The day came for Jake to ride Diablo. Miguel had invited potential buyers to come watch, wanting to demonstrate the horse's transformation. Jake was nervous but confident. He had spent 3 weeks building trust with this animal, and he believed Diablo was ready. Natalie came to watch, standing with Carmen by the corral fence. Jake caught her eye and smiled, drawing strength from her presence. He saddled Diablo carefully, talking to the horse the entire time in a low, soothing voice. The horse accepted the saddle without protest. Jake mounted slowly, settling his weight carefully. Diablo shifted but did not buck. They walked around the corral first, Jake keeping his touch light on the reins, letting the horse get used to carrying a rider again. Then, gradually, they moved into a trot. Diablo's gait was smooth and powerful, a pleasure to ride. By the end of the demonstration, Jake had taken Diablo through all his paces, including a controlled gallop around the larger paddock. The horse was responsive, alert, and while he still had spirit, it was channeled rather than chaotic. The buyers were impressed. A wealthy rancher from Santa Fe immediately offered Miguel $200 for the horse, double what he had expected to get. Miguel accepted on the spot. After the buyers left, Miguel called Jake into his office. He counted out $50 in gold and silver coins, placing them on the desk. "You earned every penny," Miguel said. That was exceptional work. I have another proposition for you if you are interested. Jake waited, hope rising in his chest. I want to hire you permanently, Miguel continued, as my head horse trainer. I have more horses than I can handle, and I could use someone with your skills and patience. The pay is $40 a month, plus room and board. And if you want, there is a small cabin on the property that needs some work but could be made livable. It was the original homestead before we built the main house. You could have it if you are interested in fixing it up. Jake felt like the ground had shifted under his feet. A permanent job, real wages, a home, even if it needed work. Everything he had been hoping for but never quite believed could happen. I accept, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you, Miguel. You will not regret this. I know I will not, Miguel said, shaking his hand firmly. Welcome to the family, Jake. Jake rode into Abiquiu that evening, his pockets heavy with his wages and his heart even heavier with joy. He found Natalie at home, and the moment she opened the door, he swept her into his arms. Marry me, he said. I know it is fast and probably crazy, but marry me, Natalie. I have a job now, a real job with real wages. Miguel is giving me a cabin to fix up. It is not much, but it is a start. It is a future. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Natalie was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, she said. Yes, Jake, I will marry you. I do not need you to be worthy. You already are. I just need you to be you and to stay. I am staying, he promised. I am done drifting. This is home now. You are home. They kissed there in her doorway, not caring who might see, sealing their promise to each other. When they finally pulled apart, Jake took her hand. Come with me, he said. I want to show you something. They rode together on Thunder, Natalie sitting in front of Jake with his arms around her, holding the reins. It was full dark by the time they reached the Rodriguez property, but the moon was bright enough to see by. Jake led her to the cabin Miguel had mentioned. It was small, made of adobe with a wooden roof that sagged in one corner. The door hung crooked on its hinges and the windows were just openings without glass. But the walls were solid and the fireplace looked intact. It needs work, Jake admitted. A lot of work, but Miguel says it is ours if we want it. We can fix it up together, make it into a real home. Natalie walked through the space slowly, her hands trailing over the walls. Jake watched her nervously, suddenly afraid she would see only the disrepair and not the potential. It is perfect, she finally said, turning to him with shining eyes. I can see it already. We can put a real bed there and a table by the window for light. The fireplace will keep us warm in winter. We can plant a garden outside. Oh, Jake, it is perfect. Relief and love flooded through him. We do not have much furniture or supplies. It will take time to make it livable. We have time, Natalie said firmly. We have the rest of our lives, and we have each other. That is all we really need to start. They were married 3 weeks later by the priest at San Lorenzo de Picuris Church. It was a small ceremony, just a handful of friends. Miguel and Carmen stood as witnesses, beaming like proud parents. Richard Patterson attended, giving Natalie the day off and a generous gift of household items from the general store. Dr. Chen came and brought a beautiful set of embroidered pillowcases his wife had made. Even the sheriff showed up, having finally returned to town, and gave them a basket of preserves and dried goods. Natalie wore a simple cream-colored dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her slender frame. Jake wore his cleanest shirt and a new vest that Carmen had made for him. They spoke their vows in English and Spanish, as was the custom in Abiquiu, promising to love and honor each other in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health, as long as they both should live. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Natalie with all the love in his heart, and the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. There was a celebration afterward at Miguel and Carmen's home, with food and music and dancing. Jake had never been much of a dancer, but he twirled Natalie around the courtyard while someone played guitar and others clapped in rhythm. She laughed with pure joy, her head thrown back, and Jake thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his life. As the evening wound down, they rode Thunder back to their cabin. Jake had spent every spare moment over the past weeks making it livable. He had fixed the roof and the door hung canvas over the window openings until he could afford glass, and built a simple bed frame. Carmen had contributed a mattress stuffed with corn husks, and Natalie had brought linens and a quilt from her mother's house. It was sparse but clean and cozy. Jake carried Natalie over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. Inside, he had lit candles, and their soft glow made the small space feel magical. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young," he said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "I like the sound of that," Natalie replied, reaching up to cup his face. "Mrs. Young, your wife, your partner, your love, all of that and more," Jake agreed. "You are everything to me, Natalie." They made love that night with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and joy. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, talking quietly about their dreams for the future. "I want to build you a proper house someday," Jake said, stroking her hair, "with real glass windows and a wooden floor and maybe even a porch where we can sit in the evenings." "I want children," Natalie said. "A whole house full of them if we are blessed. I want them to grow up knowing they are loved and wanted and safe." "We will give them that," Jake promised. "All of it. Everything we did not have, we will give to them." They fell asleep in each other's arms, wrapped in love and hope and the beginning of their shared life. The first months of marriage were an adjustment but a joyful one. They settled into routines, learning to navigate the challenges of combining two lives. Jake worked long days with Miguel, training horses and maintaining the ranch. Natalie kept the books for the bank and began taking on additional clients who needed help with their accounts or correspondence. She worked from home most days, which allowed her to also work on improving their cabin and preparing meals. Money was tight but not desperate. Between Jake's wages and Natalie's income, they were able to save a little each month. Jake put aside every spare penny toward improvements for their home and their future. As autumn turned to winter in their first year of marriage, they made their cabin cozy against the cold. Jake installed a real door and wooden shutters over the windows. Natalie sewed curtains and cushions. They acquired a table and chairs, a cupboard for dishes, a trunk for storing clothes. Bit by bit, their house became a home. Natalie discovered she was pregnant in December, just before Christmas. She told Jake on Christmas Eve, presenting him with a tiny pair of knitted booties that Carmen had helped her make. Jake stared at the booties for a long moment, his throat working. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "We are going to have a baby," he asked, his voice breaking. "We are going to have a baby," Natalie confirmed, her own eyes wet. "In late July, the doctor thinks." Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she squeaked in protest. He loosened his grip but did not let go. "I promise you," he said fiercely. "I promise I will be a good father. I will provide for our child and protect them and love them every day of my life." "I know you will," Natalie said, crying openly now. "You are going to be a wonderful father, Jake. Our baby is so lucky to have you." They spent that Christmas in quiet celebration, just the two of them, marveling at the miracle growing inside Natalie. Jake was impossibly gentle with her, even though she laughingly told him she was not made of glass. As winter gave way to spring, Natalie's belly grew round with their child. She glowed with health and happiness, even when she complained about her swollen ankles or her inability to find a comfortable sleeping position. Jake doted on her shamelessly, bringing her wildflowers, rubbing her feet, reading to her in the evenings. Miguel and Carmen were overjoyed at the news of the coming baby. Carmen immediately began knitting and sewing, creating a layette of tiny clothes and blankets. Miguel started building a cradle in his workshop, a beautiful piece made of smooth pine with rockers that glided perfectly. In late July, on a hot afternoon when the cicadas sang their endless song, Natalie went into labor. Carmen came to stay with her, sending Jake to fetch Dr. Chen. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Jake paced outside, sick with worry, while Carmen and the doctor worked. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Jake heard a thin, angry wail. He burst through the door to find Natalie exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced, squalling infant wrapped in a soft blanket. "It is a boy," she said tiredly. "Jake, we have a son." Jake approached on shaking legs, looking down at the tiny person they had created. His son. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused dark eyes, his little mouth working. "He is perfect," Jake breathed. "Natalie, he is perfect. You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," she said. "Do you want to hold him?" Jake took the baby with careful, reverent hands. The infant was so small, so fragile, yet already so full of life and personality. Jake felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise you right now I will spend every day of my life making sure you know you are loved and valued and safe. You will always have a home with us. Always." They named him James, after Jake's father, with the middle name Miguel in honor of the man who had given Jake his chance. Little James Young was welcomed into the community with love and celebration. It seemed like the entire town came by to see the baby and bring gifts. Life settled into a new rhythm. Natalie reduced her work hours to care for James, though she continued to keep books from home for several clients. Jake worked harder than ever, driven by the need to provide for his growing family. He also began working on adding a second room to their cabin, wanting to give them more space as James grew. James was an easy baby, generally happy and curious about everything. He adored his father, his face lighting up whenever Jake came home from work. Jake would spend his evenings playing with his son, telling him stories, singing him silly songs that made Natalie laugh. "You are going to spoil him," she would say, but there was no criticism in her voice, only joy. "Good," Jake would reply. "He should know his parents think he hung the moon." When James was 6 months old, Jake surprised Natalie by taking her to the general store and telling her to pick out fabric for a new dress, something pretty just for herself. She protested that it was too extravagant, but he insisted. "You gave me everything," he said simply. "You gave me a home and a purpose and a family. You made me into a man I can be proud of. Let me give you something beautiful." Natalie chose a soft blue cotton that matched the New Mexico sky, and she made herself a dress with careful stitches. When she wore it to church the following Sunday, Jake thought his heart might burst with pride. This was his wife, the mother of his child, the love of his life. And she was beautiful. The years passed in a blur of work and growth and deepening love. James grew into a sturdy, bright boy who loved horses as much as his father did. By the time he was 3, he was toddling after Jake around the ranch, trying to help with chores in his earnest, clumsy way. Natalie gave birth to their second child when James was 4 years old. This time it was a girl, with Natalie's green eyes and a head full of dark curls. They named her Mary, after Natalie's mother. James was instantly smitten with his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and appointed himself her protector. Jake continued to work for Miguel, becoming not just an employee but a true partner in the horse breeding business. His reputation grew, and people from all over the territory sought out Rodriguez horses trained by Jake Young. Miguel raised his wages and gave him a percentage of the sales from horses he personally trained. With the increased income, Jake was able to fulfill his promise to Natalie. When Mary was 2 years old, he began building them a real house. Not a mansion, but a solid wooden home with 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a sitting room, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. He did much of the work himself with help from Miguel and friends from town, rising before dawn and working after dark by lantern light. The day they moved into the finished house, Natalie cried with happiness. It was everything they had dreamed of and worked for. A real home for their family, built with love and sacrifice and hope. "You remember what you said to me that night on my porch?" Natalie asked as they stood in their new home, watching James and Mary run excitedly from room to room. "When you said you had nothing to offer me but yourself." "I remember," Jake said, pulling her close. "I was so afraid it would not be enough." "Look at what we built together," Natalie said, gesturing around them. "Look at our children, our home, our life. You were more than enough, Jake. You were everything." Jake kissed her softly. "We were everything, together." 2 more children followed in the years to come. Another son they named Thomas, and finally another daughter, Elizabeth, who completed their family. The house that had seemed so spacious became full of noise and laughter and love. There were scraped knees to bandage, lessons to teach, meals to share around their big kitchen table. Jake taught all his children to ride and care for horses. He taught them about integrity and hard work and treating people with respect regardless of their station in life. He taught them that family was not just about blood but about who you chose to love and stand by. Natalie taught them to read and love learning. She taught them that intelligence was a gift to be nurtured, not hidden. She taught them compassion and courage and the importance of building each other up rather than tearing each other down. Together, they taught their children that love was a choice you made every day, that marriage was work but worthwhile work, that a family built on respect and affection and shared values could weather any storm. Miguel and Carmen aged gracefully, becoming beloved grandparents to Jake and Natalie's children, even though there was no blood relation. When Miguel finally decided to retire, he offered to sell Jake the horse training business. With Natalie's careful financial planning and years of saving, they were able to buy it. Jake kept the Rodriguez name for the business out of respect and gratitude. The business thrived under Jake's management. He hired young men and women, teaching them his methods of patient, respectful horse training. He paid fair wages and treated his employees like family, just as Miguel had treated him. The Rodriguez Young Ranch became known throughout New Mexico territory for producing the finest trained horses available. Natalie expanded her bookkeeping business as well, eventually hiring 2 assistants to help manage all her clients. She became known as the person to see if you needed financial advice or help organizing your business affairs. She charged fair prices and gave honest counsel, and people trusted her implicitly. Years turned into decades. Their children grew up and began lives of their own. James took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, working alongside his father. Mary became a teacher, following in the footsteps of the woman who had taught her mother. Thomas studied law and opened a practice in Santa Fe, though he visited often. Elizabeth married a kind rancher from a neighboring property and lived close enough that she could visit weekly with her own growing family. Jake and Natalie became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They watched their legacy grow and spread. Touching more lives than they could have imagined that day, they met in the dusty street during a bank robbery. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration. The whole town came, it seemed, to honor the couple who had built such a beautiful life together. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, enough food to feed an army. Late in the evening, Jake and Natalie slipped away from the party, walking hand in hand to the river where Jake had camped all those years ago. They sat on the bank, watching the water flow past, listening to the night sounds. "You have any regrets?" Natalie asked, leaning against Jake's shoulder. Jake considered the question seriously. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every path I took led me to you and to this life. I would not change anything. Not even the hard times," Natalie pressed. "The year the drought nearly ruined us. When Thomas was so sick we thought we might lose him. When Mary's first husband died and we thought her heart would never heal. Not even those," Jake said firmly. "Because we faced them together and they made us stronger. They taught us what really matters, and look at us now." Mary healed and found love again. Thomas survived and thrives. We weathered the drought and came out better for it. We are blessed beyond measure, Natalie. "We are," she agreed. "And it all started because I saw past the broke cowboy to the good man underneath. Because you were brave enough to believe you could be enough." Jake smiled and kissed her temple. "You know what I think? I think we were both broken and brave, and we put our broken pieces together and made something whole, something beautiful." "That is poetic," Natalie teased gently. "Have you been reading my books again?" "Always," Jake admitted. "You taught me that, to appreciate beauty and poetry and all the good things that make life worth living." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together as they had been for 40 years. Finally, Natalie spoke again. "I love you, Jake Young. I loved you then when you had nothing but a horse and a dream. I love you now when we have more than I ever imagined. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too, Natalie Young," Jake replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You took a chance on a broke cowboy, and you gave him a reason to be more than he thought he could be. You gave him everything. And I will love you until the stars fall from the sky and the mountains crumble to dust." They walked back to the party hand in hand, their hearts full, their souls complete. Around them swirled their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, their friends and neighbors, the community they had helped build and nurture. This was their legacy. Not just the ranch or the business or the property they had accumulated, but the love they had spread, the lives they had touched, the example they had set. Jake Young had arrived in Abiquiu with nothing but his horse thunder and a few dollars. Natalie Sullivan had been a woman alone, facing an uncertain future. Together, they had built an empire of love that would endure long after they were gone. Thunder had passed away many years before, having lived a long and happy life in the pasture Jake had set aside for him. But Thunder's descendants roamed the ranch, carrying on his bloodline. Jake sometimes thought he could see Thunder's spirit in a young paint gelding that James was training, the same spark of intelligence and loyalty that had seen Jake through his darkest days. As Jake and Natalie rejoined the celebration, their youngest great-grandchild toddled over and raised her arms to be picked up. Jake scooped her up with the ease of long practice, settling her on his hip. She patted his weathered cheek with her chubby hand and gave him a slobbery kiss. "Love you, Grandpa Jake," she said in her baby voice. "I love you too, little one," Jake said, his heart swelling. This was what it was all about. This continuity of love passing from generation to generation. This was what he and Natalie had built together. The party continued late into the night. There was more dancing, more food, more laughter and stories. Jake danced with Natalie under the stars, moving slowly to a sweet melody, holding her close. "Remember when I could barely get you to dance at our wedding?" Natalie said, amusement in her voice. "I had not had much practice then," Jake replied, "but you taught me, like you taught me so many other things." "We taught each other," Natalie corrected. "That is what marriage is, a constant learning and growing together." When the party finally wound down and the last guest had left, Jake and Natalie walked home through the quiet darkness. Their house stood solid and welcoming, lights glowing in the windows where some of the family had stayed behind to clean up. They sat on their porch swing, the one Jake had built 15 years ago, and rocked gently. The night air was cool and smelled of sage and pine. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "Thank you," Jake said suddenly. "For what?" Natalie asked. "For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I did not believe in myself. For taking a chance on a broke cowboy who had only his horse." Natalie turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "You were never just a broke cowboy to me. From the first moment I saw you, protecting others even when you were hurt yourself, I knew you were special. I knew you were someone worth knowing, worth loving." "I was so scared," Jake admitted. "Scared I would fail you, scared I could not give you the life you deserved." "You gave me more than I ever dreamed possible," Natalie said firmly. "You gave me love and respect and partnership. You gave me beautiful children and a beautiful life. You gave me yourself, Jake, and that was always more than enough." They rocked in silence for a while longer, then went inside to help with the last of the cleanup. Their children insisted they go to bed, that everything was handled, but Jake and Natalie wanted to see their home set to rights before they retired. Finally, alone in their bedroom, they prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of 4 decades. Jake helped Natalie with the buttons on her dress. She helped him remove his boots. They climbed into bed and curled together as they had every night since their wedding. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Natalie asked sleepily. "In our little cabin with nothing but a corn husk mattress and each other." "I think about it often," Jake said. "How scared I was. How sure I was that I could not possibly make you happy. How wrong I was about so many things." "You made me happier than I knew was possible," Natalie murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "My broke cowboy with only his horse, but you had so much more than that. You just did not know it yet." "I know it now," Jake whispered, holding her close. "I know it now." The years continued to pass, bringing more joy and more challenges. Jake and Natalie aged together, their hair turning silver, their bodies moving more slowly but their love never diminishing. They faced the inevitable sorrows that come with a long life. Friends passed away. Beloved pets died. There were illnesses and setbacks and disappointments, but through it all they had each other. Every morning, Jake woke up grateful for another day with Natalie by his side. Every evening, Natalie thanked God for the gift of her husband and their life together. When Jake turned 72, he finally retired from active work on the ranch, turning over full control to James and his children. He still consulted and advised, still worked with the occasional difficult horse, but mostly he spent his time with Natalie, enjoying the fruits of their labor. They traveled a little, taking the train to places Natalie had always wanted to see. They visited Denver and San Francisco, marveling at how the world had changed since their youth. But they were always happy to return to Abiquiu, to their home and their family. On a warm spring day when Jake was 78 and Natalie 77, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Jake was not feeling well. His breathing labored, but he insisted on being outside where he could see the mountains and the sky. "It has been a good life," he said to Natalie, holding her hand. "The best life," she agreed, though tears were running down her weathered cheeks. She could feel him slipping away, could see his strength fading. I do not want to lose you, Jake. You will never lose me, Jake said with certainty. I will always be with you, in every sunset we watch together, in every grandchild's laugh, in the legacy we built. I will always be right here, Natalie. I love you, she said, her voice breaking. I have loved you every single day since I met you. And I have loved you, Jake replied, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. My Natalie, my heart, my home, thank you for sharing your life with me. Thank you for making a broke cowboy into a rich man. Those were his last words. He passed peacefully, holding the hand of the woman who had been his everything for more than 55 years. The entire territory mourned Jacob Young. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. There were fellow ranchers and horsemen, employees and competitors, neighbors and friends. There were men and women he had given chances to when no one else would. There were horses he had saved from being destroyed because of bad training or abuse. His impact rippled out in ways that could never be fully measured. Natalie grieved deeply but with grace. She missed Jake with an ache that never fully went away, but she also celebrated the life they had shared. She continued to live in their home, surrounded by family and memories. When people asked her the secret to their long and happy marriage, Natalie always gave the same answer. We saw each other, really saw each other, not just the surface but the heart underneath. We chose to believe in each other even when times were hard. We built our life together, brick by brick, day by day, with love and patience and faith. And we never forgot that what we had was a gift, something to be treasured and protected. Natalie lived for 5 more years after Jake's death. They were good years, full of family and purpose. She finally wrote her memoirs, leaving a written record of their extraordinary, ordinary life for future generations. She continued to be active in the community, mentoring young women who wanted to go into business, supporting education initiatives, and always being available when her children or grandchildren needed her. When Natalie passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, she was laid to rest beside Jake in the Abiquiu cemetery, on a hillside overlooking the valley they had both loved. Their headstone was simple but profound. It read, Jacob and Natalie Young, they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants. The Rodriguez-Young name remained synonymous with quality horses and ethical business practices. The house Jake built stood solid and strong, sheltering generation after generation of their family. Their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren carried forward the values Jake and Natalie had instilled. The importance of integrity, the power of love, the belief that where you start does not determine where you finish. The knowledge that the richest person is not the one with the most money, but the one with the most love. In the evenings, when the sun set over the mesas in shades of orange and gold, it was said you could sometimes see 2 figures on the porch of the old Young house. An old cowboy and his wife, rocking gently, holding hands, watching over the family and the legacy they had built together. A broke cowboy who had only his horse, and a woman who saw past the poverty to the wealth of heart and character underneath. Together, they had proven that love is not about what you have, but about what you are willing to share. Your life, your dreams, your heart, your everything. And that is always enough when you give it to the right person. Their story became legend in Abiquiu and beyond. Parents told it to their children. Teachers used it as an example. It was a reminder that the best love stories are not about grand gestures or wealth or status. They are about 2 people who choose each other, who see each other, who build something beautiful together from nothing but faith and love and hard work. The paint gelding thunder had long since become part of local folklore too. People said he was the smartest horse that ever lived, that he knew Jake was special from the very beginning and chose him just as surely as Natalie did. Whether or not that was true, Thunder's bloodline continued strong, and Rodriguez's young horses were prized throughout the West. On the 100th anniversary of Jake and Natalie's wedding, their descendants gathered for a massive reunion. There were more than 200 people who could trace their lineage directly back to that broke cowboy and the woman who loved him. They came from all over the country, from all walks of life. Ranchers and teachers, lawyers and doctors, artists and business people. But they all shared the young legacy of love and integrity. The family gathered at the cemetery first, placing flowers on Jake and Natalie's grave. Then they moved to the ranch for a celebration that lasted 3 days. There was food and music and storytelling. The older generation shared their memories of Jake and Natalie, keeping their stories alive for the younger ones who had never met them. James, now in his 90s but still sharp as ever, stood to address the gathering. He was the last living person who remembered his parents in their prime, who had witnessed their love story firsthand. "My father used to say that he was the luckiest man alive," James said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "He said it was because my mother saw him when he was invisible, because she believed in him when he did not believe in himself. But the truth is, they were both lucky. Lucky to find each other. Lucky to have the courage to build a life together when they had almost nothing. Lucky to create a love that has rippled down through generations." He paused, looking around at the sea of faces, young and old, all connected by blood and love and shared history. "We are all here because of a choice they made. Because a broke cowboy had the courage to ask for love despite having nothing to offer. And because a woman was wise enough to see that a good heart and willing hands were worth more than gold. That is the legacy they left us. Not the ranch or the money or the property, but the knowledge that love builds everything worth having." The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. That evening, as the sun set over the same mesas Jake and Natalie had watched for decades, the family gathered around a massive bonfire. They sang songs and told stories, laughed and cried, and celebrated the enduring power of the love story that had started it all. In the flickering firelight, you could almost see them. Jake with his quiet strength and gentle hands, Natalie with her bright mind and braver heart. Two people who had taken almost nothing and built everything. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and created a legacy that would last forever. Their story was not unique in the broad strokes. The Wild West was full of people who built lives from nothing, who faced hardships and overcame them, who loved and lost and endured. But every love story is unique to the people living it, and Jake and Natalie's was special because it was theirs. Because they lived it with intention and grace and unwavering commitment to each other. As the years continued to roll forward and the world continued to change, the young family remained anchored to the values Jake and Natalie had instilled. The ranch modernized and grew, but never lost its soul. The descendants spread across the world but always remembered where they came from and what their ancestors had sacrificed to give them opportunities. And always, at the heart of it all, was the story. The broke cowboy and the woman who loved him. The man who thought he had nothing and the woman who showed him he had everything. The couple who proved that love does not need riches or status or perfect circumstances. It just needs two people willing to share their lives completely, holding nothing back, building together, dreaming together, facing whatever comes together. That was the real legacy of Jacob and Natalie Young, not the land or the money or even the impressive family tree, but the living, breathing proof that love is the most powerful force in the world. That it can take a penniless drifter and a lonely bookkeeper and transform them into something extraordinary. That it can create beauty from ashes, hope from despair, and forever from a single moment of recognition in a dusty street. Their love story had a beginning on that chaotic day with bullets flying and dust swirling. But it had no end. It lived on in every descendant who chose love over fear, who saw potential in others that they could not see in themselves, who built instead of destroyed, who believed instead of doubted. It lived on in the ranch that still bore their name, in the horses that still carried Thunder's bloodline, in the house that still stood strong and welcomed family home. Most of all, it lived on in the hearts of everyone who heard their story and chose to believe that they too could build something beautiful from almost nothing, that they too could find someone who would love them not for what they had, but for who they were, that they too could be enough, just as they were, for the right person, because that was what Jake and Natalie had proven beyond all doubt. That a broke cowboy with only his horse was not broke at all when he had love to give and a willingness to share his life. That a woman alone was not without riches when she had wisdom to see true worth and courage to claim it. That together, two people with almost nothing could build absolutely everything. And so their story ended where it began, with love. Simple, profound, transformative love. The kind that changes lives and creates legacies and echoes through time. The kind that proves, over and over again, that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or sold, only given freely and received with gratitude. The kind that makes a broke cowboy rich beyond measure and a lonely woman blessed beyond compare. The kind that lasts forever, written not just in memory or records, but in the very fabric of the family and the land and the legacy they created together. That was the story of Jake and Natalie Young. A love story for the ages, a testament to the power of seeing and being seen, a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures come in the simplest packages. A broke cowboy with only his horse, a woman brave enough to say that was enough as long as he would share his life too. And from that simple beginning, a love that would never die, a legacy that would never fade, and a family that would carry their story forward into forever.